watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin in the U.S., where 3 Americans freed from captivity in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea have arrived. The release of the men appeared to be an effort by DPRK leader Kim Jong Un to improve the tone of the upcoming summit with U.S. President Donald Trump following his recent pledge to suspend missile tests and dismantle a nuclear bomb test site. Take a look.
Another goodwill gesture ahead of the DPRK-US summit. Mr. Trump welcomed the return of 3 U.S. citizens at the Andrews Air Force Base early on Thursday. They were detained in Pyongyang for almost a year. In his speech, Mr. Trump thanked DPRK leader Kim Jong Un.
I want to thank Kim Jong Un, who really was excellent to these 3 incredible people. They are really 3 incredible people. And the fact that we were able to get them out so soon was really a tribute to a lot of things, including a certain process that's taking place right now. And that process is very important. So we will see what happens. We have a meeting scheduled in a very short period of time. You'll be hearing about it soon.
After announcing the return of the 3 American detainees, the U.S. president was asked about the prospects of making a deal with Kim.
I think that we're going to have a success. I think this will be a very big success.
The 3 men's release came as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a surprise visit to the DPRK on Wednesday. Mr. Trump made the announcement in a tweet, saying Pompeo had a good meeting with DPRK leader Kim Jong Un. Washington and Pyongyang are preparing for a summit between their leaders, which is set in May or June as a result of months of improving inter-Korean relations. A U.S. official said Singapore is the likely location for the planned summit. On Wednesday, Mr. Trump said he would announce the date and venue of his meeting with Kim in 3 days.
So what now after U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo's visit to the DPRK? With us in our Beijing studio, we have Mr. Zhao Tong, who is a fellow at the Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program at Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir. Also joining us in Beijing, we're glad to have Jonathan Pollack, non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. It's good to see you here in Beijing.
Good to see you.
And in Medford, U.S., we have Sanyang Lee, Kim Koo Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at Fletcher School, Tufts University. Welcome, Professor. In Florida, U.S. as well, we invited Ivan Eland, who is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Welcome, too. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Pollack. Apparently, the time and the venue for the summit between DPRK and the U.S. have already been set as a result of the trip made by the Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo. How much will these say about the taking place of the final summit and likely outcome of the summit?
Well, we'll have to take President Trump at his word that everything is set and arranged.
Do we have other choices?
Probably not.
Yeah.
So I take your point, but I don't think it guarantees very, very much in terms of the outcome, in the sense that this could go in a number of different directions.
Like what?
Well, we don't know whether Mr. Trump himself will come in well prepared. His Secretary of State may be much better prepared, but presumably President Trump would be the lead official talking about all this. He prides himself in his unpredictability. He's even said as much, even in the last day or so, that I'm going to leave everybody guessing. I'm not going to follow the usual script. I'm not going to bother with all this.
All right, so that's one thing,
yeah.
Unpredictability.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other thing you said? They could go different directions.
Well, my concern, frankly, would be that he, out of the need for something that he would call as a win, he will make statements or make commitments or do something that, in terms of what we would call the optics of the situation, he feels he's got enough, but he leaves all the details for others. And as we all know, on an agreement as consequential as this, if an agreement is possible, to leave things dangling, to make it just look like a media appearance that Mr. Trump comes in, he leaves, leaves me very, very uncomfortable about the possibilities.
All right, Mr. Zhao, what about your assessment of the latest situation? Are we getting closer to a real summit, a summit with substance?
Well, we know that Secretary of State Pompeo visited Pyongyang for the second time. He said some progress was made, but I think maybe some of the progress was really on the logistical and technical side of the equation, the location, the time, etc. The key issue, the most crucial issue is, of course, how and when North Korea would really denuclearize, and what reciprocal concession the U.S. might provide, how a future security structure will look like on the Korean Peninsula. I'm very skeptical that North Korea is in the place ready to make fundamental concessions on its nuclear deterrent capability. Again, we had this discussion about location. I think the fact that Singapore was chosen, it was a neutral place, very different from Panmunjom, which was previously seriously considered. That shows Trump doesn't want to appear condescending to North Korea, going all the way to the North Korean doorstep to meet Kim Jong Un. So he's going into some meeting with a tough position. This is going to be a tough fight.
Okay, it's going to be a tough fight. Got that keyword too. Kim Jong Un hoped. Earlier, he talked about that to the Chinese President Xi Jinping during their latest meeting. Phased and synchronized manner will be taken to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. But seems that the White House has no intention to make the DPRK happy, apparently. Pompeo said this, quote, "In past negotiations, the US and the world had relaxed sanctions too quickly. It is the intention of the president and the administration not to do that this time, to make sure that before rewards, they get the outcome permanently, irreversibly." End of quote. All right, that's what Secretary of State said. Of course, things could be just tactic, what we are seeing right now. All sides are trying to be tactic. Before negotiation, that's perfectly okay. But the question is, Professor Sun, is the US, do you think, at this point, is preparing anything besides tactic, real substance? Not like what Mr. Pollack earlier concerned, that someone just gonna go into the negotiation and try to do whatever is coming to the mind at that point. Professor Lee.
Well, we have 25 years of playbook or lessons from which to draw some guidelines. We know that in the past, the United States has approached North Korea with, shall I say, a patronizing attitude, presuming that North Korea, needing money, aid, food, fuel, would be satiated with those concessions and would comply on the matter of denuclearization. And with each deal going back to the early 1990s between the two Korean states in 91, 92, the 1994 US-North Korea deal, the 2005 deal within the six-party talks framework, 2007, with each of those, there did come a small political victory for the United States. As Dr. Pollack mentioned, in terms of the optics of symmetry, it will be a win-win for both leaders, but the question is who has more to gain in actually effecting this summit meeting. I would say it's Kim Jong Un, and I think Kim Jong Un now has the leverage to threaten to walk away from not the summit meeting itself, but from denuclearization talks, protracted negotiations. If the US does not comply, if the US does not grant bigger and bigger concessions like non-enforcement of sanctions. So Trump is saying the right thing by saying we're not going to prematurely relax sanctions, but in reality it'll be very difficult not to.
Mr. Eland, what about your thought about that? Does the United States have a lot of choices in the way to approach the DPRK during the summit? And what is likely to be the bargaining chip that the US have in hand?
But I'm afraid that the definition of denuclearization is different on both sides. The United States wants Kim Jong Un to get rid of his nuclear weapons, long-range missiles at least, and maybe all of his missiles and the United States doesn't seem to be have that many concessions that it wants to make. Kim Jong Un, I think, would like the United States to withdraw U.S. forces from South Korea, and that's what he means by denuclearization. But I don't think the United States is going to be willing to do that as long as the North Koreans and the South Koreans are hostile to each other.
But apparently, Pyongyang, over the past few weeks, shall we say, when things are really developing fast, has committed to some actions and offers. The release of the 3 gentlemen, American, from the DPRK, and also Kim Jong Un said himself that it may not necessarily be the precondition that the United States withdraw its troops coming from in South Korea. Also, Kim Jong Un has been talking about denuclearization, which has been a key word asked by Washington from the very beginning, and he committed to that at the very first meeting he already had with the South Koreans. Meanwhile, you could also see that the DPRK tried to say, well, we are pausing, we are closing some of the sites, we are also pausing from testing further the nuclear tests and also the ICBM. So you see DPRK with some very clear definition of offerings. But we did not see anything, Mr. Polak, I have to be frank here, coming from Washington, besides there is going to be a summit, about what Washington could offer in return or step by step so that the next step can be achieved.
As Tung Jia has already said,
yes,
the definitions of what we'll simply call denuclearization are profoundly different from what not only this Trump administration has said, but many of its predecessors. The presumption being that it's all got to go away, the nuclear weapons potential, the missiles, the infrastructure.
But that's the art of negotiation, isn't it? I mean, when the definition is not that clear, then you have a lot of room to maneuver.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Well,
Dr. Polak, you know this better than I do. You work on this for decades, sir.
I think, though, it's very, very important to understand that if you are not in some kind of a framework where there actually could be transactions, could actually be issues that are negotiated, you really are coming in from a position, and remember, by the way, there have been no negotiations between the United States and North Korea since the so-called Leap Day Agreement of 2012. And the 6-party talks have been dormant since December of 2008. So there's not a lot of common vocabulary here other than resorting to the vocabulary that's been used all along. As for what North Korea has done, the hostages that have been released, they never should have been there in the first place. We should not give them, it's a gesture of some sort to give something to Trump, if you will. Trump has already exploited that, frankly, in the middle of the night in Washington, and I think that that's not, these individuals, they've suffered enough.
Right.
They should not be used in that kind of way. So what you have here are, if you will, appearances, tactics of one sort or another. But if you're asking me what is going to transpire in the talks themselves, I haven't a clue, to be frank with you, because Trump is not...
Let me phrase it in another way to Mr. Zhao. Just all of a sudden, if you receive a call coming from President Trump, given that he has a different way of doing things, Mr. Zhao, in the middle of the night and say, what do you think as a scholar? What would be the thing that I can bring to the negotiation table? As a Chinese scholar, what would you say?
Well, I think, to be honest, I would tell him that actually on the American side, they still possess the power to provide positive inducement to North Korea, especially in the area of offering sanction relief. However, the U.S. no longer possesses effective coercive pressure against North Korea.
Why?
Because North Korea has already secured very good relations with almost all other countries in this region. North Korea is projecting an image of being a self-restrained, reasonable country, wanting to connect with international community, wanting to advanced diplomacy resolve this politically.
Amazingly, just over the past 2 months.
Right, and suspending all the provocations. And with that, even there is no deal, I don't see how U.S. can resort to military option or to get another UN Security Council resolution to impose additional sanctions on North Korea.
Yeah.
So the coercive leverage is already gone.
Yeah. So your advice for Mrs. Trump is?
I think the only way forward is to be more pragmatic in setting the expectations.
But your definition of pragmatism is?
Starting with near-term easy steps that will make a meaningful change on the ground, such as freezing North Korea's capabilities, and let's start the process of direct engagement. We need time for trust to be built in order for North Korea to feel safer and rely less on nuclear weapons.
I know you want to say something briefly, Mr. Polak.
But right, the images that are there, undeniably, there has been a shift. But these shifts in strategy and direction, we've had a lot of experience over decades with North Korea. You can turn things on, you can turn things off. These are not anything that is binding and permanent, to use Mr. Pompeo's favorite adjective.
That's what you're referring to as Professor Lee earlier mentioned, the playbook, of course. Professor Lee, same question to you. If you receive a call in the middle of the night from President Trump, well, of course, there's no time difference for you, I guess, in this way. What would be the thing you would offer to him as an advice? What the U.S. can put on table and what U.S. can use as a bargaining chip?
Continue to enforce sanctions. There has been little over 1 year of meaningful sanctions enforcement against North Korea in history. Previous administrations, the George W. Bush administration had effective financial measures against North Korea in 2005, but very prematurely relaxed them once North Korea escalated with its first nuclear test in October 2006. So to presume that Kim Jong Un has been compelled by Mr. Trump's tough sanctions enforcement to comply and come in from the cold, I think that's an erroneous presumption. I think Kim Jong Un is running the show. He's the primary mover in all of this. He's lining up the leaders of the world's biggest powers for a series of summit meetings, thus becoming routinized, legitimated, and the routinization of summit meetings does wonders for Kim Jong Un's image. From global pariah, he has now become a global statesman. In Hollywood, Ms. Tian, if a movie does well commercially, you make a sequel, even a prequel, Rambo 1, 2, 3, 4, Terminator 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Why would Kim Jong Un not do this again? Walk away, buy more time to advance his nuclear capabilities, and then a few years later, do another one.
So you are saying to the president, no sequels of Hollywood movies? No, sir. Oh, I got your point. That's your advice. Besides movie watching, Mr. Eland, what about your thoughts? I mean, after all, the phrase so-called the maximum pressure has been what President Trump, coming from the United States, been very proud of. He believes, as he has said on many occasions, that this, what we have today, the situation with DPRK and its interaction with the rest of the world, has a lot to do with the U.S. so-called maximum pressure. Do you believe that? Is that the real reason, or is the fact that the DPRK has already acquired quite a level of sophistication when it comes to nuclear weapons and also sophistication of ICBM?
Yes, I think North Korea's negotiating position has improved greatly with their strides in nuclear weapons and long-range missiles that might possibly threaten the United States. And I don't think, I've studied economic sanctions since I was in graduate school, and they almost always are overstated in what they can do. They can, if they're multilateral, they can put significant economic pressure, but their economic sanctions are an economic way to get a political result, and they almost always don't get the political result unless it's a very modest political goal. This is not a modest political goal to get rid of North Korea's nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, or all missiles. And so I think he's in a very good position. And also, why would he have any incentive to get rid of his missiles and his nukes, since the United States has really treated non-nuclear powers with very little respect. Milosevic in Serbia Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Even after Gaddafi got rid of his nuclear weapons, the West overthrew him, led by the U.S. And also, we just had, very recently, the United States has gone back on the Iranian nuclear deal.
Exactly. So what about that, Mr. Zhao? One could not come into the negotiation table without taking note of all the other things happening around the world. Same for the United States when you talk about the playbook, but same for DPRK when they look at the world playbook of the US over the past few years. So, Mr. Zhao, in this juncture, I have to ask you this question. What can China do? Obviously, China played a key role. Six-party talks then, on very important junctures, China directly talking to DPRK, directly talking to the US about the solutions. But eventually, what will China do about the summit? And whatever is the result of the summit?
I think the security dilemma between North Korea and the United States is really difficult to resolve, if possible at all. I don't think North Korea would go into the summit meeting with Mr. Trump on the premise of trusting U.S. political commitment, trusting U.S. security guarantee, and therefore surrender its nuclear weapons. There is no near-term plan for North Korea to do that. So, but with North Korea obtaining a nuclear deterrent, obtaining a basic system of security, another long-term opportunity opens up. I think that's where China can help. North Korea now wants to pivot to economic development, becoming a more normal member of the international community, to be reached, to be respected, to be connected with the outside world. That's where I think China can really help, together with South Korea, with Russia, to transform North Korea in the long run into a normal and less paranoid country. That's the key to resolve this.
Certainly in the conversation between Chinese President Xi Jinping and the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un recently in Dalian, the economic development issue was being discussed. We do not know to what extent and what length, but certainly that's in the talking points earlier released by the two gentlemen. But let me go to you before we wrap it up. We've been waiting for this moment, Mr. Polak. Remember how many times we've been discussing about a summit, and now it's coming. So let's just put aside whatever skepticism that we have. But looking at what could really happen, and what should really happen, and what countries can do to make it happen. This is a time, Dr. Polak, some say, to show the true colors of what your intentions are behind the so-called DPRK issue for all countries involved, 6 parties, all of them. Dr. Polak, what about the U.S.?
We have to ask, what do we mean when we say the DPRK issue? Is the issue really its nuclear weapons, or is it something even much more profound than that? Something that's related to the very character of this regime, the fact that it's a dynastic system. It's isolated from the outside world. It's trying to defy the laws of gravity.
But what about the true color also of the United States or other players as well? What exactly are they looking for when they talk about the DPRK issue? Are they talking about the regional issue, or are they talking about the nuclear issue? Are they talking about a big ambition about the region? Very briefly from you, sir.
Well, I mean, there's some of each of that. But what I would say, though, makes this situation fraught with risk is that we have an extremely unconventional American president who's going into this process and thinks he can solve it with his own unconventional approach.
I guess a lot of questions still being unanswered. We have to see how things are moving from here before we really answer them. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Jonathan Polak, Zhao Tong, Sanyong Lee, and Ivan Eland. Really appreciate it. Thank you.